Okay, so only a couple of you. So one of the very important changes that happened between 1.0 and 2.1 is originally it was an 83-page kind of white paper structure that was separated into 15 domains organized into 3 parts: architecture, governance, and operations. And one of the issues that we had was we had a tremendous amount of content and data, and it was very difficult to kind of decide what to put in, what to leave out, etc., and how to streamline that for consumption. 83 pages is still pretty thick. So what we did in the 2.1 is we really split it up to where, when you read the guidance in version 2.1, you'll notice that it's kind of more of an executive overview in each section. And each one of those chapters, now there's 12, we consolidated some of them, are going to be their own working products. So the need and desire to have you folks contribute in each of these as subject matter experts, for example, if you know a lot about encryption, if you know a lot about forensics, if you know a lot about network architecture, etc., as it relates to cloud, those working groups are starting to get stood up in ways that allow you to really focus on one area very diligently and produce an entire volume of work specific to that. So that's very useful, so please do get involved. You can't, so to kind of, that was a bridge between our 2 sections. You can't swing a dead cat without somebody giving you a definition of cloud computing these days. Over the last year, we've luckily gone from, hey, what is cloud, how can I use it? This slide, the next couple of them are unfortunate artifacts of having to define cloud in ways that kind of make it consumable at the same point in time, or a little bit of word salad. So just to be clear, right, a lot of what we see in cloud computing are natural next step evolutions out of what we've already seen in IT. We see some references to them here: models for mainframes, utilizing virtualization, utilizing and implementing outsourcing capabilities. Things we've seen for quite a while. The biggest drivers and differences that people have heartburn with, especially in security, is the notion of multi-tenancy and the fact that you don't necessarily know where your data is, right? So those 2 things combined make people look upset, and in some cases, reasonably so. And we're going to talk about some of the things that can be done to maybe quell some of those concerns. NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology, has a great set of standardized sets of definitions that are reasonably well adopted, not only in the US, but pretty much throughout the world in terms of the way in which they define the kind of more technical elements of cloud computing. I made a picture of it because I like crayons. So really they talk about the deployment models: public, private, hybrid, and community. And for the most part, these labels are hotly contested by IT folks that like to have case matches and essentially talk about market transitions that over time, all of these labels are kind of less important. All you need to know is really we're going to end up with hybrid models of people building cloud-like functions or capabilities inside their network and utilizing external services and tying them together, kind of just the way the internet evolved, right? We had kind of things stood up initially internally, we connected the services outside, we tied them together. But you'll hear this notion of the SPI model, software platform and infrastructure as a service, and they have various, applications that they appeal to are a little bit different. So in software as a service, it really targets end users. There are applications that are meant to be used by end users, and platform as a service really targets developers, people who want to build apps on somebody else's platform using specific programming languages. And infrastructure as a service is really targeted to system administrators who want to build bundles of operating systems and applications but don't really care about the moving parts, or shouldn't care as much about the moving parts. We'll talk a little bit about this here, but 3 kind of key points about how cloud computing is generally recognized, at least from a technical definition, is this notion of on-demand provisioning, right? I can essentially very quickly use an interface that is convenient to me, usually a web browser, go to this thing that looks like a portal and say, I'd like these services, go. And I can pay for them very easily, or if I'm an enterprise, I can figure out how that gets charged back to me. Multi-tenancy, in a public cloud environment, one that, for example, like Amazon Web Services, means that you are sharing those resources with generally, other people, other companies, and within the concept of public computing, they're generally disparate groups. They're not related to one another, or may not be. Internally, however, multi-tenancy can also apply to multiple business units, right? So if I have an internal cloud-like environment, we'll talk about what that means. I can talk about serving multiple services and share them amongst multiple tenants there. So elasticity, on-demand provisioning, and ultimately multi-tenancy are three interesting pieces of what make some services cloud computing. But you'll also notice, for example, when we talked about in the last slide, like, what's the difference between outsourcing? What's the difference between software as a service, or what used to be called ASPs 3 years ago, that became software as a service, and then suddenly became cloud-based SaaS? What are those differences? In many cases, they're semantic, right? In many cases, the notion of how you get multi-tenancy, for example, could be using virtualization. It could be in the database. So, don't get hung up on these terms. They're in the grand scheme of things. What's important is when you look from a security model perspective, and I built these little models that kind of talk about infrastructure services, facilities, hardware, some amount of abstraction and networking with a set of APIs. And then you run your virtual machines on top of them, your apps and your operating systems. Platform as a service, in the purest sense, is the same as infrastructure as a service, with a set of integration and middleware capabilities, and that you write applications on top of that platform. And software as a service is all of that, plus the apps and data all bundled into a single stack. So in a visual way, what's important for you to understand is that an infrastructure as a service, short of what the provider offers to you in terms of security, right, to maximize availability of their platform, all of the rest of the stuff on top of this, the applications and VMs, is your responsibility. So you still have to build it, you still have to configure it, administrate it, and ultimately secure it in ways that are somewhat abstracted from what actually runs it. In software as a service, you RFP it in, you build it into your contract, you set expectations on service levels. And what's interesting about that dichotomy, and platform as a service is kind of somewhere in between. What's interesting about that dichotomy is it's very important from a security perspective to recognize that when you hear, that cloud-based services are more or less secure than others, within the context of that definition, you have to understand what that means. We're talking about the platform itself, overall, VMs, the apps, so you hear an awful lot of things that, for example, if you had no practical guidance to understand what the differences between cloud and non-cloud environments are, you're either going to scratch your head and wonder how can you make a statement like that, or you're going to be able to have a kind of way of decoding what that means, and that's really what the guidance was intended to do. There are some bullet points in here that I find interesting. I didn't write this, so I will disagree with one of them. It's not the first one. That ultimately, the way enterprises are looking at cloud computing is there are parallel paths going on. They're saying, how can I leverage commodity-based mass market cloud computing capabilities in public clouds like Amazon, like software as a service? That's going on and will for quite some time. At the same point in time, they're looking to leverage the large sunk cost and investment that they already have on their internal enterprise, that they've been really working for using virtualization to essentially modernize and get more automation internally, and turn that into something that looks like a cloud. The two pieces that are really missing in enterprises today to really call it cloud, short of just the virtualization, is the chargeback functionality and most of the self-provisioning capabilities. Right? It still means that you generally have to call IT. This is getting better, but in general, you still have to call IT and say, hey, I'd like this thing spun up. Now, it takes a heck of a lot less time than it used to, or should, given the agility of virtualization. But mostly today, the self-provisioning portals, like with Amazon, you can go sign up with a credit card, collect a few things, and you can launch an AMI, right? 20 minutes. We're not quite there in the enterprise yet, which is why folks are looking at and using the term private clouds, not disingenuously on purpose, but they're getting to the point that as the technology catches up, they're going to be looking to build public cloud-like capabilities internally and then ultimately mesh them together. Compliance is really the biggest driver as opposed to security. So we confuse these terms a lot. We talk about the security of cloud. In many cases, the things that prevent people from moving applications and workloads has nothing to do with security, it has everything to do with compliance. Right? If I had to worry about PCI, would you not move stuff to something where you didn't have to spend money to do so? No, you would probably put it in the cloud. There's a whole lot of activities going around cloud around this notion of building an assurance ecosystem. So lots of initiatives, lots of activities, some of which I'm involved in, some of which the CSA is definitely involved with. This one, I actually I have a little bit of a problem with. So it's not that I think ultimately what I'd say is that this hybrid cloud model of public and private and virtual private cloud, all these things tied together, will arrive at being the dominant model. It's going to be very difficult in contrast with the first one, that if you're building large private cloud capabilities for data that because of compliance you can't move out to public clouds, or at least won't for some time, that ultimately dominating is like saying that, you know, the internet